Welcome to the show, folks. I am your host, your boy Blunt, and this man next to me really doesn't need an introduction in New York City. But for those of us who don't live in New York City, well, those are you guys that don't live in New York City, I have with me Mr. There he is on that side, Mr. Roger Toussaint. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Uh, Glad to be on you, Eric.
Thank you. So before we jump into the heart of why we're doing this interview, because there's going to be a lot of people that's going to be angry at me that I'm not doing this live, but there's a reason for it. And before we even get into that, I want to give you the floor so you could give yourself an introduction for the people for those few people that may not know you. So take it away.
Okay, so as Eric pointed out, my name is Roger Toussaint. I started off in New York City Transit as a cleaner, then I became a track worker. Then I became the chairman of the track division for 2 terms, following which I became president of TWU Local 100 for 3 terms, ending in 2009. Then I went on to work briefly with the International for 2 years. I retired in 2012. I live in Georgia. Um, so that's my basic background for the purposes of this conversation. Okay.
So, Mr. Toussaint, um, people are going to watch this and they're going to wonder. First of all, I'm glad you explained what happened to you after, because a lot of people are going to wonder what happens to, the presidents after they retire. But there's a reason why you're doing this particular interview right now, and it has to do with your name coming up in things about retirees, and so you want to clear the air on that. What exactly is it that you want to let people know?
Well, I think that the key point is to provide some explanation and context for how we got to where we are now, some
Okay,
of the history behind that.
okay,
Um, so that's, I think, what brought me to the show.
right. Because there's people saying what's happening between the retirees and the local and transit. And so let's put people up on it. The retirees have suffered a loss. And in January of this year, they were forced to go into Medicare Advantage plan. Now, not that that's a bad plan. If you have no kind of illnesses or anything, it may be the best thing since sliced bread. But there's issues that are people having with the Medicare Advantage plan. And the two main functions that retirees are having is one, they were auto enrolled into the plan, so they didn't have a choice into if they wanted to stay on traditional Medicare or go into this Medicare Advantage. And then the second thing is there seems to be a lot of diminishment in going into this Medicare Advantage. And so one of the reasons you're here now is because now your name is starting to come up in it as to people saying that, you kind of the one who kind of messed it up for people. So let's clear the air about that. You know,
Okay, so I think that to begin with, people need to understand that Medicare coverage, which begins at age 65,
mm-hmm,
you each employee, not only transit but all employees, pay for it. On your paycheck, there's a deduction called FICA.
mm-hmm,
FICA is divided between funding Medicare and funding your Social Security or your Social Security retirement check. So this is something you've been paying for all your life, all of your
mm-hmm.
working life. Um, so beginning in January, as you pointed out, which is 10 months ago, for the first time ever, all local 100 members were mandated into Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is a privatized or privately administered Medicare coverage. Um, and that's a change from the traditional Medicare, which transit workers enjoyed for decades prior to January of 2024. Um, so this is an important change again, because traditional Medicare was the primary coverage that transit workers had for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is when you reach age 65, you are automatically, meaning everyone, not just transit workers, switch to Medicare coverage. And Medicare picks up about 80% of your medical bills. And your union coverage provides what is called wraparound coverage for the other 20%. Um, so by by having it privately administered, what you have is the intervention of a private company working on the basis of profit
Mm-hmm.
to administer your Medicare. And the only way they could administer their Medicare is if out of the Medicare funds, they get profits.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a pool of money provided by the government to fund Medicare, and the all of the plans, Aetna included, Humana and others, they basically get billions of dollars from that plan into their pockets instead of into your care.
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, I can't see anything positive about Medicare Advantage, even though they would put some sweetness in there that are fairly meaningless and minor in order to make it look attractive,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to get people to enroll in it. But the danger is anything privatized, whether it is your medical care or your pension, which is coming down the road, um, means money that's not available for your medical care, and it means decisions get made on the basis of profit. Um,
Exactly.
so that is the reason why you have heightened, you have prior approvals, you have prior authorizations, you have increased amount of denials, and you have a shrinking pool of providers,
Mm-hmm.
where certain even critical care providers decline the Medicare Advantage plan because they're not happy with either with the level of reimbursement that they receive from these privately run, privately administered plans, or that they have to go through a lot of bureaucratic stuff in order to get their reimbursement, and they have to hang out there for a long period of time before they could um, replenish their expenditures. And in the meantime, of course, they have cost and they have employees and they have overhead and so forth. So so you have a large pool of providers all over the country that have been dropping and
Mm-hmm.
getting away from Medicare Advantage plans and refusing. Um, and in New York, this was also the case on certain critical high-end care providers um, were declining Medicare Advantage, and some negotiations took place, which I suspect is only temporary, because they have used these whatever terms were negotiated would have to be renegotiated in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years,
3 years.
and the issues are going to come up again,
Mm-hmm.
um, and more providers are going to drop or decline the coverage. Now, um, the this change to the traditional Medicare again was never in dispute prior to 2024. To justify this change, the union ended up, when you look at the court documents, the union ended up arguing, the union and its attorneys ended up arguing that the union itself didn't have an obligation to retirees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that it's almost as if this was gratuitous, whatever the union does for
Correct.
retirees, and that the employer wasn't obligated to provide medical coverage. Um, so, which as for reasons I'll point out in a minute, this is entirely wrong. The union has negotiated for retirees and retiree benefits for several decades, I have reviewed contracts going back many decades, all the way into the 70s and before, and you have specific references to retiree or pensioner benefits and sums associated with pension benefits for Medicare, for pre-Medicare and Medicare retirees, meaning pre-Medicare between the age of 55 and 65, and then Medicare eligible from 65 on. You have, in all of the contracts, you have specific references to this coverage and to the amounts that the employer would provide, and so on and so forth. So it is not true to say that the union did not have the obligation or did not negotiate on behalf of retirees or do it or have done it gratuitously, as opposed to have an obligation and therefore a contract um, um, to provide this benefit to retirees. What is true is that prior to January of this year, the government provided traditional Medicare, which provided the bulk of the coverage, 80%, and therefore relieved the authority, the MTA and the New York City Transit and the OA and so forth, relieved them of the obligation to provide the bulk of your coverage. And what Medicare Advantage does now is it attacks both the 80%, the Advantage plans, in terms of narrowing that coverage and making it more difficult and taking away reducing the role that your own physicians
Mm-hmm.
play in decisions about your health care. So they're going after the 80% coverage, but they're also going after the 20% provide the wraparound coverage provided to Medicare eligible retirees. So, for instance, if you decline, if you refuse to take, um, if you insist upon traditional Medicare, then you lose the 20% pretty much, and you lose
Mm-hmm.
prescription coverage,
Right, and then
right?
you got to come out of pocket for that.
You got to come out of pocket for that. So that
Mm-hmm.
is to penalize and compel people to go along with the Medicare Advantage enrollment. And
Mm-hmm.
they did not give anybody any choice. And I'll point out also that when I review the documents, um, the when TWU Local 100 signed the contract and put it before the executive board and put it before the members, in the early documents, you don't see any reference to the elimination of traditional Medicare. What they say is that we have got new improvements, and you now have option number one and option number two. It doesn't tell you that the traditional Medicare option has been eliminated completely.
Mm-hmm. All
So
right.
they went silent on that, and they got the executive board to approve the contract and to recommend it to the members for voting based on not being forthright and forthcoming with the fact that traditional Medicare was being eliminated. So that's important. And I'll also make the point that that the whole idea um, of handing this over to private companies and this becomes a money maker for them. It to the tune of not just small money but billions of dollars. It makes it both incredible and incredulous to suggest that this is that this would that this is about improving your benefits, because somebody's getting billions of dollars out of it, and it is not us. It is not retiree. Of course, I'm a retiree. I'm over 65. I'm a Medicare eligible, so I have skin in the game here on this issue. Of course. Um, so let me give some background with respect to because one of the things I've heard is that somehow they've linked this to the health benefit trust, the fact that we do no longer have the health benefit trust at local 100, and therefore presumably no, we don't have input um, into these decisions, and the employer or the provider has a carte blanche to make whatever changes it it wants or deems prudent or necessary or convenient to them. Again, or none of these things are true. So let me explain some of the background here to the Health Benefit Trust. Um, when when I took over the leadership of the local in January of 2001, the Health Benefit Trust was on the brink of bankruptcy. Um, it was a multi-million dollar deficit, and by the time the contract came around in 2002, December 2002, it was it was in full-fledged bankruptcy and with a massive deficit in the millions of dollars. And what had happened is that the health benefit plan was funded based on a defined or specified contribution. It's called a defined contribution plan. The employer agrees to contribute X number of dollars in the negotiations, and you have to spend the money that you have. And if you don't have enough money to cover the bills, you either have to reduce the benefit or reduce the benefit or increase cost on the employer. Um, um, so so because of the defined contribution plan, the the because of the defined contribution basis of the funding, the plan had run into a large deficit by December of 2002. From 1996 to 1999, the plan was funded based on an agreement with the Transit Authority, with the MTA, to 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 ensure the benefits for the life of the contract, 96 to 99. But the kicker to that was that the employer was under the contract and the agreement of the union. The employer was allowed to draw down on the reserves that existed at the time for the health benefit fund, for the health benefit trust, to the tune of about $45 million.
Mm.
So they wiped out the reserves, and of course, that is imprudent and a violation of their fiduciary responsibilities, which require to have to you maintain a cushion just like a normal life. You maintain a cushion just in case. That cushion was eliminated, and the fund began to slip into the red well before I came into office, and that only intensified in 2000, 2002. By 2001, the New York State Insurance Board, which is the body that oversees employee benefit funds, to make sure that they're solvent and they're run properly, they're being funded properly, had formally notified the trustees at the Health Benefit Trust that they had determined that the fund would be totally insolvent by December of 2001 because
Mm.
of these deficits that they were running. And they instructed the trustees to advise the New York State Insurance Board what measures were going to be taken with respect to adjusting benefits or cutting benefits or other costs, other measures to provide for the deficit situation. Um, so that's where we were in 2001. Well before the negotiations was in December of 2002. Um, so what we did in December of 2002 is, of course, this was the main priority in the negotiations, because we had spent a good 2 years being threatened with benefit cuts.
Mm.
And we staged massive demonstrations on the streets of New York City, brought out thousands of transit workers, 15,000, 16,000 in Midtown, in order to build up a war machine against the MTA to basically tell them that they will have hell to pay if they attempt to go forward with cutting our benefits. And we did that for 2 years before the negotiations.
Mm.
And so this was a very, very major confrontation. Going into negotiations, securing the health benefits was a priority in terms of the money priority. Another priority, just to mention it, for instance, was in terms of cost or money, was to provide a full complement of sick days for MAP store employees. Up until the 2002 contract, MAP store employees were only entitled to 5 sick days a year, whereas transit authority employees were entitled to 12 sick days a year. We made that one of our priorities to make sure that we came out of the negotiations with 140% increase in MAP store members' sick time from 5 days a year to 12 days a year. It's very huge. Those are big numbers. But anyway, to go back to the health benefit trust. So going into negotiations, we made fixing the health benefit situation a priority, and we successfully did that. And what we did is we changed the plan from a defined benefit plan to from a defined contribution plan to a defined benefit plan. So it no longer depended on what the employer contributed. The employer was now required to foot the bill for the full benefits and was unable to change the benefits.
Okay.
Right? And the contract specified that. It also specified certain benefit improvements that would be included in what the employer was required to fund. So, for instance, that's how we got 60 psychiatric visits and traffic checkers coverage and others, and a bunch of, a list of other improvements that
You said
were included. Yeah.
it says 60 psychiatric visits are included in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Annually. Right.
it. Just yeah,
But
I never knew that.
well, I
Learn.
can read out a list. There's a list about 8 or 9 or 10 items that were improvements in the 2002 contract. So the first thing was that they were required to pay off the deficit, tens of millions of dollars, and they were required to then go on a going forward basis, guarantee the benefit. And this normally in previous contracts, it would read that the MTA for the life of this contract, for the duration of this contract, or from 1996 to 99, that would be the language. Will provide such and such benefits. In this case, in the 2002 contract, it said blanket that the MTA has to provide this benefit and cannot change it. And it was not what you call, there was no sunset clause attached to that. It was a permanent, long-standing thing. Now, this is important because it meant that we removed, when you go into these negotiations, the main problem always is health benefits, and then, of course, pensions. Before you get to wages, you got to figure out how to keep your members healthy, right? How to pay for the health benefits and family health benefits, right? Spousal, children, and so forth. That's the priority. You don't get to wages until you've settled the health benefits, right? So, so this was the most important piece going into these negotiations, and we got the benefits guaranteed, and said this is important because it also removed in the negotiations and the subsequent negotiations. It meant that the union was no longer behind the 8 ball, no longer under the gun to engage with the MTA regarding the rising cost of health benefits, which typically would increase by several times the rate of normal inflation. So in those periods, it was like a 10 to 12% annual increase.
Right.
So and that became always have been a major point of leverage for the employer to come and say, well, these costs are ridiculous. You have to provide concessions, or you have to show us how help us pay for this, and so on and so forth. That piece of leverage that gun to our heads was taken away in the 2002 negotiations. The employer no longer had the ability to use the rising health benefit costs as a leverage because they now were plainly required by the language of the contract to provide the benefits unchanged. Right? Now, I point out that this is important because I don't think there's any other union in New York City that had that guaranteed health benefit provision, where you can't change the benefit, you have to provide it and pay for it, regardless of the cost. Now, we paid, the point about it is that, and again, what I'm getting to is that it was particularly reprehensible that the union has been negotiating changes in their benefits when that
Right.
was settled in 2002, that they have to pay for it. And you can't reopen that, right? Which is what they have been doing, ignoring the requirement. And when I say that, we actually paid for this. We paid at the door. In the 2002 negotiations, among the other a bunch of things we had to accomplish, with the health benefits being the primary among them, we agreed to accept a lump sum instead of a wage for 1 year in that 3-year contract. And that was part of the way of funding the contract. So in that sense, we paid at the door for these changes. You can't come back again in subsequent negotiations and reopen it and say and ask us to pay again when we paid at the door. You follow?
Right. Correct.
So, which makes it very reprehensible. And I've pointed this out in things I've written and addressing myself to the current leadership and previous leaderships under Utano and Samuelson, that this is just treacherous and reprehensible for them to be allowing the authority to go back on the obligation that they bought in 2002,
Right.
that we paid for. And I'll point out that for 8 long years, from 2002 to 2000 until they took over, until the end of my administration, there were absolutely no changes, no adverse or negative changes in health benefits during that period.
Correct.
They never put on the table that they had the ability to do this or the ability to do that, or changes here, changes. Never occurred. In fact, the only thing that occurred was improvements. In 2005, we got the authority to agree to pay for retiree, pre-Medicare retiree between the age of 55 and 65, pre-Medicare, to eliminate the deductibles for prescription coverage. So we have prescription coverage for and the deductibles were totally eliminated to provide relief for retirees. Now people need to understand this. I mean, you have about 20,000 retirees out there. That has been the number. It's probably more now. And what happens is, unfortunately, under Tier 6, many of our members are not going to be able to retire at age 55 anymore.
Right.
And the reason for that is that they can't afford it because they're not making enough money, not enough money going in, not enough of their earnings are pensionable.
Right.
Right? So
Exactly. That
the
pension is crazy.
tendency will be to stay on the job longer. Right?
Correct.
But with the situation we face between the age of 55, when you were able to retire, if you had 25 years of service, and age 65, you fell into what is called we call it a black hole. You had basically no coverage, right?
Right.
Especially so if you were living outside of the tri-state area, right? Which most of our retirees move down south in order to stretch their retirement dollars. You end up with no coverage. You've got to go out of pocket, and of course, that's when you're at the age when you're getting sicker and you need more medications and procedures and visits and so on and so forth. So we took care of that by agreeing to the 1.5% deduction from people's paychecks, from members' paychecks, to offset the cost of providing non-stop medical coverage from the age of 55 to the age of 65. That is what is loosely referred to as lifetime medical coverage because Medicare picks you up at age 65.
Right.
But you were in a black hole from 55 to 65, and we needed to address that and fix that, and we did. And interestingly enough, what after taking over the union and and um, and 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 um, and attacking
Samus.
my
Okay.
administration for the 1.5%, the
Right.
first thing that they did in the first contract is increase the 1.5 to 2%. So right
So
now,
you're talking about when Samuelson took over.
yes, when
Okay.
Samuelson took over, well, this is the contract that ran from 2012 to 2015, but it
Mm.
was only settled in 2014 because for 2 years he could not get Cuomo to agree to a contract,
Right.
right? So they went without a contract from 12 to 14.
Mm.
Eventually in 14, when they did the contract, that's what they moved it to 2% after railing for a long time about this 1.5. What we
Mm.
did in 2005 was we we agreed to the 1.5, and then we began working in the subsequent contract 2009 to 2012 to undo the 1.5.
Right.
So in 2009 we got the authority to agree to limit the 1.5 to 40 hours only, as opposed to gross wages,
Okay.
right?
Mm.
And we eliminated the ability to, we call it was what is called an escalator clause, where you could increase it by the rate of inflation,
Mm.
right? So the rate of inflation between '05, when we agreed to the 1.5, and '09 had caused the um, the number to increase to 1.53, meaning by 0.03 of an increase, which is 3.3 of 100%, 3 of 100 out of 100. Small
Right.
increase, but we eliminated that as well. So we limited it to 40 hours and eliminated the escalator clause because the reducing the 1.5 to 1% or to zero point 0.5 or eliminated it at that time was a bridge too far to cross in
Mm.
terms of the cost, right? So we were tackling it by incrementally reducing it.
Right.
Um, so to go back to the health benefits, um, in so from 2002 to 2009, the end of 2009, while I was there were only improvements in the health benefits coverage for actives and for retirees, pre-Medicare retirees and Medicare retirees, right? The only negative or adverse changes that came about after beginning in 2010-11, and then in the contract in 2012 to 15 and the subsequent contracts. So there were numbers of changes. For instance, I've seen now we left the co-payments for prescription drugs for actives at zero for generic, 10%, $10 for formulary, for non-formulary, and 15 for formulary, right?
Mm.
That number is now, there's still a zero for generic, but it's now increased to $20 and $40.
Mm.
So that's a 100% increase and 175% increase from where we left it in 2002. Um, and also I saw that in the latest the current contract, um, the only contract that ended in 2023, I saw that there's also a new fee for emergency room visits of $100
Mm.
um, for the first time, which is
Right.
of course a significant deterrent. No one
Mm.
goes to the emergency room. If you're living in Brooklyn, you're not going to sit down in the emergency room where you're going to have to wait for hours and hours to be treated.
For
You go to the
real.
emergency room when you have to, when you must.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now they're taking you hostage, and now you're gonna pay for that. You're gonna be
Mm.
discouraged. There'll be a deterrent attached to you treating yourself, getting treatment, because you have to pay $100 deductible, right?
Yeah, and people nowadays really don't have it like that no more.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So,
So there are those types of changes, but beginning in 2010, right after I left, and 2011, um, they began to negotiate with Aetna to take over active coverage, and now they have negotiated with Aetna to take over Medicare Advantage, Medicare eligible coverage, right?
okay.
But but with actives, um, they were in there from 2012, but the negotiations, I believe, began in 2010. And what happened, if people recall this, if you go back that far, is that one of the first things they did is that they audited the list of our members and their families, and they threw thousands of people out of the coverage,
Mm,
right? As a result of this audit, um, they were between actives and retirees. They threw between almost 4,000 people
wow.
off coverage, which is what they did. They scrubbed these lists um, in order to save money,
Mm,
right? And then the burden becomes on you for you to go find paperwork, documentation, marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates, um, your tax forms, your tax filings, um, and a bunch of other paperwork that was required for you to reestablish. So some people got their coverage reestablished, but after going without it for a long period of time.
right.
So and that has been that was the introduction of Aetna, um, when they began scrubbing the list and negotiating with Aetna to take over the actives coverage. Now, I point this out because what is happening to Medicare eligible retirees is going to eventually move over to actives. It's going to move to pre-Medicare, and then it's going to move to actives, because what they're doing is they're normalizing the practice of requiring you to get prior authorizations other than
Hmm.
what your doctor authorized, right?
So this goes against what you have current uh president Richie Davis, who's been going around the shop gate saying, "Oh, for those of people that are in this room, that are actors, what's happening right now doesn't really
Doesn't
affect
affect
you."
you, which is
Right.
a sin on two levels. One, of course, is that it's not true. It does affect you. It will affect you because, again, they're normalizing certain things that will then be imported over
Hmm.
to pre-Medicare and actives, without a question. But the other thing is that it teaches members to just look out for themselves.
Exactly.
So what if retirees are being screwed? As long as I am not being screwed, go ahead. No,
Right.
that's not how unions are supposed to
But they
operate.
they they kind of pitched it to where the actives got a raise,
Yeah,
and they're not really telling them that they got that raise off the backs of retirees.
retirees, right? Exactly, right. So that is how the negotiations typically would occur. They would say, if you want to get a raise, you got to give us these concessions. So they fund it by saving monies from retiree medical coverage,
Mm,
Medicare eligible and pre-Medicare. So that is what is that we broke that mold as well in 2002. In the 96 to 99 contract, the reason why they allow them to to eliminate the reserves was because they wanted to have to show some relatively healthy wage increases, because there was an elections in the union in 1997,
mm,
right? And they just needed to get by that elections, right? And then there was an election schedule in 2000. So um, so they postponed the deficit situation until the next administration, just in order to get themselves elected. So the
mm.
bad news comes later on.
Right. They kicked
And
the can down the road, as they
kick the can
say.
down in terms of the bad news. So
Hmm.
We could have done the same thing in 2002 because there was an election scheduled in 2003. But
Mm.
instead, we were straightforward with members and say, we got to save the benefits and we got to get MAP store members 12 sick days. And whatever we got to be not signing a contract without fixing these things, putting our
Right.
people in a safe place, right? So we secured the health benefits and we took, regrettably, we took a zero and a lump sum in one of the years of the contract. I
Yeah,
could
I
have
remember.
simply said, forget all of this, let's put a percentage on there for instead of a lump sum, right? And kick the can down the road.
Right.
Get past the 2003 elections and then deal with it after
Right.
with a bigger deficit. Because
Yeah.
that is typically how, unfortunately, unions have operated. They operate from election cycle to election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And our members are trained in that way. They go along with that,
Exactly.
you know. Um,
I think
but
they're
we,
kind of waking up from that though right now because if you go on social media, you kind of see a lot of them are complaining like, oh, we don't see none of the none of the officials until it's election time, and that's the
yeah.
only time they actually come out. So it's like they're kind of getting away from that now.
Well, but the point is that, but they voted for a contract where Richie Davis, and I saw him shop gate, and I think it was at Kingsbridge Depot, saying
Yeah,
that nobody here is affected.
yeah. Saw the same video. I was like, oh my god,
And then he went
wow.
on to say brazenly that even his father is a who's a retired bus
Uh
operator
huh. Yeah.
or maintainer, whatever.
The sales pitch he has.
So
Yeah.
he was willing to throw his father under the bus, right, to get his contract ratified. So I don't know that we passed that. The mentality of training transit workers to think just in terms of me instead of we, right, is still a problem.
Yeah.
Um, my title, my division, my coverage. So what happened
Hmm.
if you have second class citizenship? I'm sorry for these other guys over here, whether it's private bus lines or whether it is station agents or cleaners or traffic
Hmm.
checkers, um, the underclass in the union. So I'm sorry, but somebody got to pay for my raise.
Yep.
That's been the training, the mentality. And you could never get to a strong union if that is in fact what the type of mentalities you embrace. Unfortunately, that is for too long, that has been the training. So we broke that mold in 2002. We took the lump sum, fixed the health benefits, fixed the sick days for MAP store, and did a whole bunch of other things. We established for the first time a child care fund, training and
Hmm.
upgrade fund. All those things began in 2000 with the 2002 contract. Um, and even the Widows and Orphans Fund for members who die in the line of duty to make the authority provide a fund for them that only started in 2002. And I could point out a whole bunch of other changes. In 2002, for instance, up to that time, members not aware of this, but there was a training wage. When you came in and you go down to PS 248 or wherever you train, right? The wage was $4 an hour. We used to call it Burger King wages, right?
Right.
Um, the 2002 contract brought an end to that and said, when you start off at the regular scale. The regular scale at that time was 70% of top pay, then you go to 80%, 90%. You're familiar with that,
Right.
right? So the 2002 contract brought an end to $4 an hour on Burger King wages, training wage, and moved everyone, required the authority to pay everyone. So think about the mentality of training members to say it's okay to give this other transit worker $4 an hour while they're training,
Yeah. I
right?
mean,
That was approved.
why take the job at that point? It's
That was
$4.
approved. That
Wow.
was approved. $4 an hour, right? In
Mm.
2002 contract brought an end to that,
Mm.
right? And I could point out a whole bunch of others fairly dramatic changes. Traffic checkers had no coverage. Traffic
Mm,
checkers had no guarantee of any work, not even for 1 hour a week. In
mm,
2002, up to that time, traffic checkers, and you had about, at the time, you had about 500 and they grew to about 700, right? Traffic checkers would report to 130 Livingston Street on every Wednesday morning, line up in front of the desk, in front of the window, and basically plead and beg um, management to give them a few hours work for the week. And the contract said that management could turn them away from the window and don't give them any work for the whole week,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
We changed that in the 2002 contract, required mandatory hours, minimum hours for traffic checkers, and we increased that in subsequent contracts. So the union had been built up on based on acceptance of second-class citizenship, depending on which title you were dealing with or which division you were in, and so forth. So across the union, there were lots of these second-class citizenship situations, including for retirees, including for private bus lines, including for titles that were predominantly female or black and Hispanic, cleaners, a title I started in, station agents. That's the second class. The transit unions like ours tend to be operator driven, operator led by a train operator, bus operator, conductor, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that was the
We
thing
had
when I started. It was like
yeah,
you want to be an operator. It was those they say especially bus operator. They the one that drives the fancy cars and the whole
yeah, the
the
problem is that they
transit.
have to work inhuman hours to do that, and
Yeah,
they
and
don't
people don't
people don't
understand
admit
that.
that inhuman hours. Lots
People,
of, if there was ever a study done of the divorce rate and the broken families and stuff as a result of the sacrifices transit workers have to make because they have to spend so many hours on the job in order to make ends meet and to live comfortably, it's just it becomes
Mhm.
just ridiculous, the
'Cause I
sacrifice.
remember when once I was hired and was in the classroom with Gibson and them, they told us the life expectancy of a bus operator after he retires is 3 years.
Yeah,
I said, "Oh, what? What?" And then when you actually start to do the job, you understand why that is.
yeah,
And people only see you driving a bus. They might sit there at the rap seat and see you just pushing the vehicle from A to B, but they don't see the stresses and the mental acrobats you have to do just to get from A to B.
right,
And I always said that you know the job may not be physically hard, but being mentally hard is worse on you than
right.
just physical. You know. So
So
yeah.
to go back to the health benefit situation, it's just a very it has been it's a downhill climb, and it's going to get worse for beyond Medicare eligible retirees. It's going to be these practices are going to migrate into for sure
Mm-hmm.
um, into um,
Active.
into pre Medicare and into actives. I mean, actors already may have forgotten, but they already got a taste of that once Aetna became the full carrier, and some of these hurdles that you now have to jump through
Mm-hmm.
instead of relying directly on your provider.
Yeah,
Uh,
now a lot of them are getting phone calls saying we need to come to your house to
yes,
do
I get
assessments and
those
stuff
calls
like
as
that.
well.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but you know, so they're doing all so because this is now they have turned this into a business and a science.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of documentation out there about this as a about the racket that
Mm-hmm.
is the private providers managing healthcare systems for retirees and for actives. You know, so that is and it's getting they have been doing it for decades, and now they have it down to science,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Um, you know, so this is a and they're taking over decisions that previously was left to your doctor.
Right. Between you and your doctor, it's like
Right.
it's like now you have to wait for, like you said, the pre-authorizations, and
Right,
then what happens when you get denied?
right.
You know, we've had stories. We covered this whole switch from before January when they was talking about it on our show, and we were talking about how this for profit thing is really not a good idea when it comes to your medical, and it's like now that it's come to fruition that they're seeing it, but it's like the main problem is that the union itself is denying that it's a diminishment in benefits.
Benefit, right. Let me give you an example. Um, in 2000, and when Samuelson took over, one of the things that management did that they did not dare to attempt to do while I was there is that they eliminated lifetime surviving spouse medical coverage in the private bus lines.
Mm,
So prior to Samuelson, you had lifetime surviving spouse medical coverage. You pass away as an active employee, your spouse is covered for life,
right,
as opposed to 1 year and then you got and
and then you're
Cobra and
done.
so on and so forth,
Right.
right? Um, so the authority, after I left, the authority moved to eliminate that by claiming that this had been given up under my administration, even though they never didn't dare attempt to do that while I was on the job, while I was as the president of the union,
Right.
right? For years, they never even attempted, never even raised it, never became an issue until Samuelson came. And um, what was shocking and reprehensible was that Samuelson and the union's attorneys, Dennis Engel, I think he might still be general counsel of the union, they agreed and in writing that the union had given up this surviving spouse coverage, and the authority was in the right to do this.
Mm,
So after the officers and members on the private bus line raised hell for years, then they finally agreed to take it to arbitration. But you've taken something to arbitration that you have been on record saying that the authority had the right to do.
mm-hmm.
So that means that your
Right.
arbitration, your claim, and your argument are dead on arrival,
Exactly.
which is exactly what occurred. They selected an arbitrator. They broke every rule to select this arbitrator, right? I could go into that later. But the arbitrator they selected was a fellow named Marty Scheinman. Turns out he is the same arbitrator that Eric Adams used to
Mm,
put 250,000 retirees and city workers into Medicare Advantage plans. He also ruled that this was legitimate, that they had the right to do that. Same guy, Marty Scheinman. So he's
mm,
known as a professional fixer among
mm,
arbitrators. Samuelson brought him in to rule on the surviving spouse medical coverage on the MTA bus. Brought him in improperly, right?
mm,
And he ruled according to what the parties wanted, meaning the authority wanted it and the union wanted it, because the union had said that as much. Samuelson and Dennis Engels had said that the authority that this had been given up by the union, by me. So now MTA bus employees lost surviving spouse medical coverage. Right?
and
And
it,
I
and they,
wrote to that arbitrator before he ruled. I said, look, listen, transit workers are people of honor. We would we would we would fall on our own swords first before we agree to eliminate our spouse's medical coverage. Who does that?
yeah, right.
Right? If you have any type of honor, who would give up their spouse's medical coverage? You keep it for yourself, but your spouse. I mean, come on. So, but I say this to say that the union is now saying that the change to Medicare Advantage is legit. It's also
Right.
legit, right? That the MTA can do this and that the union itself has no obligation to retirees or to negotiate on their behalf.
Yep,
And
that's exactly what they're saying.
yeah, and all the making a indirect, disingenuous reference to is under the Taylor law. Um, Retiree benefits is not a mandatory subject of negotiation. It's not
Mm.
a mandatory subject of negotiation, but it has always been negotiated in the contracts,
Right.
both for transit workers and in fact for city workers. And that supersedes. So the parties have agreed to provide coverage for retirees. But you have Arthur Schwartz and union attorneys arguing that they have no obligation to negotiate on behalf of retirees when the union has been negotiated on behalf of retirees for decades. And all of the contracts refer to coverage for pensionable employees and Medicare and pre-Medicare um, employees. Um, so that is the danger that now because what it is that they put themselves in a hole and they can't get out of it, so they keep digging. So it'll become almost self-defeating to attempt to challenge it in arbitration. That's why you need a change of administration that can take these issues up. Um, because the current administration, they're not going to admit that they were wrong, mistaken, and they were in error, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I always said, and I've emailed Richie Davis. I said, listen, what you said about the retirees is untrue. You could come to one of the meetings or Zoom just to hear what they got to say. I didn't get any reply from him, but I'm like, he's not the type of person that's going to say, you know what, maybe I was wrong, and step back and say, let me look at this again. Instead, he just goes back out there and he doubles down
Right,
on his rhetoric that he's spewing and trying to sell that to all the actors. And it's like now actors are waking up
right.
to the plot of what these retirees are going through. And it's just a shame what the state of the union is.
They can't.
And again, I'm not even talking about MTA. I'm talking about the union, which is
Our union,
crazy.
our
Yeah,
advocates, we pay them.
exactly.
We pay them to advocate for us, right?
Exactly, which is
And they're out
crazy.
there saying this stuff. The MTA is in the lawsuit. The MTA could remain in the background. The
Yeah,
union is the one attacking the retirees.
exactly. It's they sitting back with twirling their thumbs,
Yeah.
watching the fun go by.
And it
They're like,
creates a very bad impression before a judge or any third party judging this stuff, because that carries weight, that your own
yeah,
representatives are saying that
oh,
you're in the wrong,
exactly,
that you have no case, you know.
exactly.
And that is what they did with surviving spouse coverage for the private bus lines, and that's what they're doing now for Medicare eligible retirees, and that's what they're going to be doing tomorrow. So the folks that are going along with this, when they come for you, they'll be they would have, what they're doing is they're normalizing this type of betrayal. They're
Hmm.
normalizing prior authorizations. They're normalizing pre-approvals. They're
Hmm.
normalizing shrinking pools of providers, right?
Hmm.
All of those things are now becoming normal. It's becoming up to Aetna,
Exactly.
right? Up to Aetna.
Not your
And,
doctor, up to Edna.
yeah, and let me point out one of the additional thing so people understand. Up prior to when the health benefit trust existed, the health benefit trust consisted of 3 representatives from the union and 3 representatives from the MTA, all equally powered. So this notion that this was a union-run trust is total nonsense.
Mm.
It was equally powered trustees on both sides. And the contract provided that if there was a dispute between those equally powered trustees, 3 and 3, that the dispute is decided by the arbitrator, the contract arbitrator. Well, in addition to requiring the MTA to fund the benefits, we preserve that right to take any dispute to the arbitrator, right?
Right.
We preserve that right in writing. We created a senior labor management committee made up of 3 representatives on both sides. And that senior labor management committee was mandated in writing to meet quarterly, meaning 3 times a year.
Mm.
Sorry, 4 times a year, quarterly,
Yeah.
right?
You have to excuse me for laughing when you say committee, because
Right.
I mean that was one of the main things that the former administration, the one after you came in,
Yeah.
that was one of their main lines. We're going to form a committee for this. We're going to form a committee for
No,
that. Everything was committees. It's like,
but this was contractual. This was
right,
in order to have guardrails and have radar on anything coming down the pike and
right,
changes being contemplated and so forth, right? Um, so that you can end up taking things before an impartial in the event of a dispute. So
right,
the problem is, contractually, they were required to have quarterly meetings, 4 meetings a year minimum. It actually says that at least 4 meetings a year. Well, it turns out that in 2010, there wasn't a single meeting. In 2011, there wasn't a single meeting. And those meetings only started after I started raising Holy Hell in 2012. And they were still not quarterly meetings. So they have missed most of the quarterly meetings required to have radar on any changes being contemplated and on the provider changes and so on and so forth.
mm-hmm.
So that's also important.
Yeah,
So we
absolutely.
preserve the exact same, the same option, the same recourse that was available under the Health Benefit Trust. The ability to have a dispute, identify, take it to an arbitrator for settlement, right? That was preserved, right? Under the Health Benefit Trust as well, you should know that despite the existence of the trust, the deficit had grown, like I pointed out, but we had also lost multiple arbitrations,
Mm-hmm.
worth tens of millions of dollars. Um, so the trust was, I'm saying this to say the trust doesn't assure you of anything
Right.
in terms of either union control or protection of your benefits and so forth. In fact, what trustees are obligated to the trust, not to the members or even to the union.
Mm.
Under the law, trustees have to they obligate their fiduciary responsibilities to the trust that they belong to.
Mm.
So, for instance, in 2002, um, the, the MTA was threatening to sue us. I was one of the trustees because we refused to cut benefits, right? Because their argument was that as a trustee, you have to carry out your fiduciary responsibility and reduce the benefits because we don't have the money to pay for it. And legally they were right, but there was no way we were going to do that, right? So
Right.
actually, in um, this led to Sonny Hall. He was also a trustee at the time. I had kept him on as a trustee. He resigned as a trustee because of our refusal to agree to or implement cuts in the health benefits.
Mm.
You understand? So that's what trustees' obligation is to the trust that they belong to under the law. You
Right.
understand? On the private bus lines, the trustees over there were also being sued. The union trustees were being sued for refusing to cut benefits,
Mm.
right? Because under the law, that is your obligation again is to the trust, not to you, not to the entity that appointed you there.
Right.
Interestingly enough,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the
Definitely
law.
interesting.
Yeah. So there are lots of stuff that could be gone into here, but I hope that some of this helped to shed some light in terms of the context and the background to this health benefit situation and why it is absolutely urgent for people to be paying attention, uh, because it's coming to a village near you soon.
Mm. I mean, I, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I really think I hope that the active employees are taking heed to what's happening. Because, like something that Brooklyn Pete and myself always say, people don't get involved until it happens to them, and they think because Richie Davis said that it's not going to happen to them, which is false. It's going to happen to them, and then by then it's going to be too late to do
Too late.
anything.
Too late. I mean, and unfortunately, these are many of these members are members that we went on strike to protect. We went
So
on
it's like,
strike. The banner of our strike was that we do not eat our unborn.
yeah, I remember that. I
Right?
remember that.
We do not eat our unborn. We're not going to give up our unborn. We're not going to give up the future transit worker, because in the strike, their last and final demand was for future transit workers to pay 6% towards their pension instead of the 2% we were paying. They wanted to
Mm,
triple the contributions, and earlier on, they had also included increasing the retirement age to 62, right?
right.
And we told them that that would be a strike issue. There is no way we were going to allow this. But again, this was part of building up a whole culture
Mm-hmm.
of an injury to one is an injury to all. Stand
Mm,
together, defend each other, and so forth, right?
right.
So we were
Right.
saying to the active members, you got to go on strike to protect the people coming behind,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know the people coming behind are saying, apparently, some of them are saying it's okay to sell out the retirees,
Yeah.
right?
The people in
Unfortunately,
front, let them
right,
go. Who cares?
right.
Yeah.
And that is going to come back to haunt you.
Yeah.
It always does, right?
Yeah.
And the problem it becomes that when it's time for you to fight back and to assemble allies, when you look to around you, you'll have very few allies, you know, which is
Yeah.
also why we build alliances with the communities.
Mm-hmm.
Because despite the hard times we get from customers over the fares and so forth, we understood that we were in a fight for members, and in a fight for members, our allies wasn't the MTA. Our allies were the riders.
Mm-hmm.
So we cultivated very close ties with the riders and the rider organizations. So, for instance, on the second day of the strike in 2005, when the news organizations polled New Yorkers, a majority of the New Yorkers, even though they were being inconvenienced, a majority of
Mm-hmm.
the New Yorkers said that they sided with the union
Mm-hmm.
instead of with the MTA. Because we were on strike not for more, just for more money. We were on strike to defend future transit workers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our nephews, our sons, our daughters, our neighbors, we were defending them. These jobs, we were making sure these jobs, right, was left
Mm-hmm.
in a good condition for them. People
Yeah.
got that, right?
Yep.
It wasn't a selfish move, right? Um, so 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 that paid off in the strike. When we needed the riders and the customers, they stood with us against the MTA,
Yeah.
right?
And it didn't hurt that his strike happened around the holidays, which is something
Right,
they
of
gave
course.
up also.
Right. No,
So,
we gave that up actually. We
okay.
agreed to move the date from December 15th to January 15th. It was a concession, unfortunately, that we had to make in order to end the strike. Right. We had to make a
Okay.
few concessions in order to end the strike. We got what we wanted. We got the big things we wanted. And you could never
Right.
get everything you wanted. So
Yeah,
for
it's a
instance,
negotiation. So.
right, we got we got we got a pension refund and the refund of pension overpayments, which had been denied in courts before and
Mm,
denied in the legislature when we went up to Albany. So it was a lost issue, but in the 2005 strike, we got them. we forced them to agree to a pension refund of $131.7 million,
Mm.
right? That benefited over 22,000 transit workers. So we got
Yes.
a refund, we got lifetime medical coverage instead of, you know, um, having all of these retirees without medical coverage, right? We got Martin Luther King Day for the very first time in
Mm-hmm.
2005, and a bunch of other things. But you have so these were sacrifices that we determined that were necessary in order to come out of the strike stronger as a union,
Right.
um, and with our members standing shoulder to shoulder together, and with the riders on our side and so forth. Because you fight today to prepare for the fight the next day. You know, this is a journey. It's not a one episode um, event. You
Yeah.
know.
So with that said, any last words that you want to give out to both the retirees and the active members?
So, I think I pretty much said what I wanted to say there. But it will just be reiterating. But again,
Okay. Mm.
the if you want to have a strong union, you have to build a we union, not a me union,
Mm.
right? As long as you're going to be building a union based upon your division, your title, um, your own personal needs, then you will never have the strength required to go up against the MTA, right?
Mm.
And you will never have a strong, and you will always have mediocre leadership at best, right?
Exactly.
Leaders who will stand up in front of you and bullshit you, right? And you
Mm.
go along with that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or deliver contracts that give you instant gratification but hurt you down the road in terms of weaken you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what the culture and the norm had been prior to um, the first contract I negotiated in 2002, right? You kick the can down the road and you leave the damage and the hurt for later on, and you have urgent problems that need to be fixed in order to build a
Mm-hmm.
strong, powerful fighting organization, and that's what you got to focus on. That's
I think
it.
a lot of things is that these uh administration that's current and the one before that is they're terrible negotiators. They
Well,
just don't know how to do it.
this is not just about negotiations. This is about whether you come to the table strong. In
Right.
other words, then you can there's a place for crossing your T's and dotting your I's and then doing your investigation and you having smart lawyers and making a good presentation. But in a fight, which is what a negotiation is,
Mm.
the outcome is determined by whether you came to come to the table strong or not.
Right.
It's often decided before you get to the table. If you come to the table weak, you're gonna get your pockets picked.
Exactly.
If you come to the table strong, then you can extract from them, compel them to give up what what you need. It is not about just the words in the negotiation. This is why we put all of the emphasis on preparing the contract fight rather than just what is said at the table,
Right.
right? Because we want to, you know, if you come to the table and you bring a slingshot and the other guy have a shotgun, it's decided already before you got to the table.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So you got to have a shotgun. You have to have your own shotgun set up, right? And if they're gonna threaten you and they take hostages and threaten layoffs and so on, you got to have some stuff to threaten them as well. You can hurt, you can let them know that there will be repercussions and consequences. You have to prepare your fight in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you engage in just wishful thinking. You have to be able to convey to the other guys that if they don't do the right thing, there'll be consequences for them. If they don't have that if they don't have that message, then it doesn't matter how just your cause is, how correct you are, how fair your arguments are, you will not prevail.
Mm.
That's the business that we're in.
With that
All right.
said, yep. I appreciate you coming on, Mr.
Sure.
Toussaint. It's been an honor for me. And I know you could go on for
Hmm.
days. There's so many other things. And the door is always open if you ever want to come back and discuss more issues. You got my number. Hit me up anytime.
We have lots of issues that could be discussed, but for today, that's
But
enough.
today, that's enough.
Surely.
So with that said, I'm your boy Blunt, and that's
All
Mr.
right.
Roger Toussaint.
All right.
Appreciate
Take
it.
it easy. Thank you.
All right.